I'd like to present you with a very simple scenario that we're going to be using throughout most of the lessons in this entire course. And this scenario concerns logging, and it also concerns two kind of typical objects that you have when demoing object-oriented structures, a car and its engine. But let's begin with the logging. So a logging is a pervasive concern. Whichever part of application you're working with, you might be interested in a logger, so you might define an interface. So I will have an interface called iLog, and this interface is going to have just a single method called write, which is going to write a particular message to whatever log infrastructure you have available. And then we'll have a concrete implementation of iLog. We'll make a console log, which predictably enough is going to output things to the console. So I'll implement the iLog interface, and here we'll simply output the message. So here I'll say console.writeLine the message, and that's pretty much it. So we have an interface iLog, we have a concrete implementation called console log. We could have other implementations like an SMS log, for example, and we'll get to those a bit later. But for now, this is what we have, and we want to use this logging infrastructure when defining some sort of other object-oriented constructs. And in terms of the other things, we're going to define a very simple scenario where we have an engine, and that engine is being used inside a car. So we have the objects car and engine, and of course, since the car actually has an engine, we may as well make it a field engine like so. And we might also want some logging functionality in both the engine as well as the car. So in both of these cases, you would have something like iLog log, and you would have exactly the same thing here. So you would have iLog log like so. So now the question is how you actually initialize those objects, because at the moment, since this is a private field, you probably want a constructor. So we'll do CTOR-F to initialize the log, and we'll do the same for the car. And for the car, you have to initialize both the engine as well as the log. So CTOR-F here will create the appropriate constructor. Now, having made this, we might also want additional functionality, because that's what coding is all about. You want additional methods and additional behaviors. So what I'm going to do is I'll give the engine an additional field. Let's have the field called ID. So in this case, I'll have just a private int called ID. This is going to be the ID of the engine. Now I'm going to initialize it with just a random number. So I'll say ID equals new random. And I'll just do a new random.next here. So we have a random engine number, and then of course we can have some functionality for getting the engine to go ahead and move the car. So we'll have a method called ahead, which will take the power, and here we'll say log.write. So we'll output something to the log. We'll say engine, and then the ID of the engine, ahead, and then the power. So this is the engine going ahead and turning itself on and going in one particular direction. You might also have a reverse direction or something to that effect. And then of course we have the car, which is actually using the engine. So in terms of the car might just have a method called go to get the car to go somewhere. And here we'll say engine.ahead 100, which will cause the logging message for the engine to write something. And then we'll also use the log here to write something to the output. So here we'll do log.write car going forward like so. So this is our scenario. It's not using dependency injection at the moment. What we're going to do is we're going to explicitly initialize all of these constructs and get them to actually function. So first of all, you would have the log. So var log equals new console log, and then you have var engine equals new engine, and here you specify the log. So we'll add that, and then of course you make the car. So you say var car equals new car, and here for the car you can specify the engine, and you specify the engine with a small e, of course, engine like so. You specify the engine, you specify the log, and then you can get the car to actually go ahead and go forward. Alright, so this is how you initialize objects in a scenario that has nothing to do with dependency injection, because we've manually specified the dependencies by providing them as constructor parameters. And this is going to be a theme going forward. Even when we talk about dependency injection, we're still mainly going to use constructor parameters. And hopefully you can see the limitations here, that the car depends on the engine, it depends on the log, so both of those things need to be provided. If they're not provided, then the car isn't going to go forward, and if you don't provide them, you'll get null reference exceptions when you try to do something. So it's important to provide them somehow. Let's actually run this scenario. Alright, so as you can see, we've got the engine with this random number going ahead with a power of 100, and the car is going forward. So this is what we wanted, and that's what we got. Now the question, or rather a set of questions, is what happens when you have a car which is dependent on not just two components, in this case an engine and some sort of logging mechanism, but depends on 10 components. And in this case, specifying them and creating them all by hand is tedious. So that is one reason why dependency injection might be required, so that you don't have to write the new keyword anywhere. We don't use the new keyword in dependency injection, so that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, about mutual dependencies. So a car depends on the engine, but the engine also depends on the log, so you have to specify it in multiple places. What if it was possible to specify all those things automatically? Another thing is to do with lifetime. What if we don't want a separate log to be available for each component? What if anytime anybody wants a log, they have to use the same singleton log? Or maybe they want a single log per particular scope. So the additional flexibility in terms of managing the lifetimes is once again something that a dependency injection mechanism can provide. So all of this can be done using a dependency injection framework, and that's what we're going to see next.